Thank you for your attention. I will talk about the clash between copyright on the one hand and freedom of information on the other hand. So as you may know, freedom of information laws are the laws which make it possible for us to know government contracts or ask the government how much the highway costed or what are the terms of the contract concluded between the government and its favorite think tanks and so on. And copyright comes into play when the government material, so the public record, was made by a third party. So for example, the government uses photographs of a photographer, or the government uses preparatory works, scholarly papers made by think tanks. So the government pays for it and then uses it for its policy work. And then these materials are copyrighted on the one hand, but public records on the other. So what's the solution? I will first talk about the Hungarian way, then shortly about the American, and then really shortly about the United Kingdom's solution for this problem. Yeah, so in Hungary, it's a really recent thing that the Copyright Act was amended with an exception for freedom of information. Everything started with a journalist asking for thousands of preparatory works made by a think tank for the government. And the government really did a really bad defense in the case, so it lost the case. And the court ordered it to release 21 gigabyte of data. It's all scanned papers, so it's really 40,000 pages of preparatory and background materials done by a think tank for the government. And so the court basically ruled that freedom of information trumps copyright in these situations. Then the government changed within 1 week, filed the law to the parliament, so acted really quickly after the court's decision. And now the Copyright Act says that if the material requested by freedom of information is copyrighted, then it doesn't have to be released, so the copy does not have to be sent to the asking journalist or citizen, but the government agency only have to allow the journalist or the citizen to go into the building of the public agency and read it there. And the government argued that this is because it's the only possible way to protect copyright in these cases. It has quite a few problems because if, as in the court case, there are thousands of pages, no one can read them really through sitting in a government agency, or it's a question whether they can make photos or not, or they can scan it, or the journalist can sit in for months to go through really thousands of pages. These problems have to be solved by court decisions, which are not yet done. And also the reasoning lacks some logic, because the government said that it's the way to protect copyright, but what kind of right exactly? So is this the only way to protect these publicly funded scholarly papers against plagiarism or the unity of the work, or what right exactly? And is it really the fair balance between freedom of information and copyright? So these papers are funded from government money, and it's really the copyright which is so important. So there are some questions surrounding this law. Now let's talk about how this is done in the United States and in the United Kingdom. In the United States, there was a very interesting case in which the question was whether photographs by the Times magazine, which were part of the FBI records of of a murder case of Martin Luther King. So the photographs were made by Time magazine, but they were in the possession of the FBI. And whether someone can seek these photographs and ask them from the FBI. And what is really interesting in this case, that the court ruled that all three parties have to be involved in the case. So the journalist asking for the records, the FBI, and the Times. And the situation has to be resolved this way because it's only possible to, if all three parties are party to the case, to make a judgment which is enforceable against the Times, for example, and to take into account all interests of all parties. So the case was then resolved by an agreement between the Times and the journalist. But what is interesting that the court ruled that all three parties have to be involved in the litigation to make a bonding judgment at the end. There are other cases where the court ruled that copyright can be more important than freedom of information. So there are cases which I listed here in which state court said that the requestor has to pay a fee for a normal licensing fee to obtain the public records which are copyrighted. In the United Kingdom, copyright is no barrier for release. It survives the release in these cases, so the third party retains copyright even if the material is released to the journalist or any citizen who wanted to see them. And the agency may advise the requestor or may warn the requestor that, hey, I'm releasing this to you, but it's copyrighted, so act with care. And there is an exception in the copyright law that criticism, review, or news reporting is an exception to copyright. So I think this makes the fair balance between all the interests, because in this case, the copyright holder is protected by copyright, and also the public has the right to use these materials to assess whether the governments did a good job or not. So the journalist can read these copyrighted materials and then write an article that, yes, this material was taken into account, it was did in a good way, so the public has the right to form an opinion on the work of the government, which is the reason why freedom of information laws exist around the world. Yeah, and I think this makes a better balance, as I said, as the Hungarian law, because in these cases the materials are released, while in the Hungarian system it's all just a question: what can the journalist do? Can make photographs or not? Can write articles about the summaries of what he or she read in the government agency. Thank you for your attention.